Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today I am sharing with you a project made with the Better Together stamp set, which is a stamp set that I helped design along with Mary and Jen for the Collective Creators. So I am going to create a little scene here. So I'm using my Misty because this is a pretty large image and it's the first time I'm stamping it. So I'm going to go ahead and line up my full image off to the left-hand side a little bit here. And I am working on a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I'm stamping the entire image out with Blackout ink by Ink on 3. And I apologize, my table is very wobbly. When I recorded this, it was at the very beginning of my craft room reorganization. So I kind of had everything torn apart. If you guys had ever seen my craft room, I had the IKEA unit where my tables were attached to the shelf next to it. So it had a little bit of stability. I took that off the shelf, so it's no longer stable at the moment. So I apologize for the camera being so wobbly. So I went ahead and stamped that out twice, and next I am cutting out a mask using Gina K masking magic paper, and here I'm going to cut the inside of the handle. So I'm leaving the one end or the top portion connected and kind of leaving a little flap there, but I'll just make sure that that's lined up before adhering that to my card panel. I did the same thing with the inside of the little scissors, just making sure that they match up. I like to start with the most intricate area and line that part of the mask up first, and then the rest kind of falls into place. So in this case, I lined up the top portion of the mask and the rest of the mug just kind of fell where it needed to fall. So next I'm going to go ahead and stamp this image again. However, I'm not going to stamp all of the crafty materials and crafting supplies inside the mug. So again, I'm using my Misty. It's probably best to use a stamp positioner for this. I'm going to go ahead and ink up the bottom portion of the stamp and just use my stamp chamois to clean off the top portion. Just kind of wipe that away with my finger to make sure that there's no dampness left on that stamp, or else you'll kind of get a little bit of smudging on your card panel. I cut a mask for this as well, kind of just eyeballing where the back portion of the mug would be and line that directly over my image once again, including that little flap that I had created for the handle of the mug. To draw in the back portion of the mug perfectly, I'm just going to go along the mask. So I'm taking a Copic Safe pen here, and this is an EK Success Journaling pen, and I'm just going to go along the outline of that back portion of the mask. Next, we're going to do a little bit of ink blending. I'm going to be using some Distress Oxides. I'm going to be using Picked Raspberry, Abandoned Coral, Dusty Concord, and Seedless Preserves. I'm using a Blending Buddy brush by Trinity Stamps, and I'm using two different brushes here. I tend to just stick to one brush per color family, and I don't seem to have a problem kind of mixing and matching. I did take a piece of Post-it note tape just to mask out the bottom portion of my card panel, kind of at an angle, so you're not looking at the whatever table that these two things are on straight on. I started with the Abandoned Coral on the top, then moved on to the Picked Raspberry, then the Seedless Preserves, then the Dusty Concord on the top, and you can see here that it's not blended well at all, and that's okay. Once I reach the top portion of the card panel, I'm going to kind of go in the reverse and make sure that each color blends with the color next to it, and then I'll move on to the third color, if that makes sense. So here I'm making sure that the Seedless Preserves and the Dusty Concord blend well together, and then I'll bring in the Picked Raspberry, make sure the Picked Raspberry and Seedless Preserve blend well, and then I'll bring in the Abandoned Coral and make sure that those two colors blend as well. Once I am happy with my ink blending, and again, I'm sorry for the wobbly table here, I'm going to go ahead and carefully remove my masks. Depending on what masks you're using, just keep in mind that sometimes that moisture kind of seeps through. With the Gina K, I don't have that problem, so I can remove my masks immediately. So next we're going to move on to the Copic coloring. Well, first I took an EK Success Journaling pen and drew in, just kind of freehanded, the rest of that mug in the background there. And actually, before I move on to the Copic coloring, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my globe. And I was originally going to kind of keep this as a no line look. So I stamped this with Fade Out ink by Ink on 3, which is a great ink for no line Copic coloring, or no line anything really. I did stamp this a few times just to allow you guys to see it a little bit better on camera. And I am using the logo of the Collective Creators as my inspiration here. So you'll see here that I'm going to bring out a bunch of different Copic colors and kind of mix them with different color families. As long as the last number is either the same or maybe one, possibly two off from the one next to it, you should have no problem blending. So here I'm starting off with the B00 and B02 for that little area that will be blue, and then I'll kind of move on to some greens, but I'm going to move on to greens with the 02 and the 00 so that they closely match the blues with the 00 and the 02. Oh, I'm also bringing in a BV02. So I lied anyway. This is not the green section. This is the purple section. So I'm moving on from blue to purple, and I fit in that BV002 to let the colors match a little bit better than the V04, then the V01 towards the bottom. And sometimes you'll have to go back and forth a little bit just to make sure that they blend a little bit easier. So where I'm going from the purple to the blue, I just went back in with that blue just to make sure that they're blending. Same thing for the other side of the globe here, except we're using some different color combinations. Again, starting with that blue on top, and here is actually where we are going to go to the green, and then it will be pink on the bottom. Now you don't want to mix the pink and the green because they don't mix. So in order to kind of create kind of like a buffer between the pink and the green, I'm going to add just a little bit of that B or the blue marker, just kind of act as a buffer, because the blue and the pink will blend. You might get a little bit of purple in between, but I'm okay with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue my little globe here. And if you look at the logo, the outside of the globe, or not the outside of the globe, but the rest of the globe, I guess where the water would be or the oceans would be, is actually white instead of blue. But I wanted there to be a little bit of shading. A mug is a round object, so our highlight would be in the center. So I am going to use some C markers or some cool gray markers to add a little bit of shading to the rest of my little globe here, just concentrating on the outside of the globe or the outer edges of the globe being a little bit darker than the middle. So I'm just going to add a teeny tiny bit of my darkest color and then kind of blend that out each and every time, concentrating that highlight being in the center. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to explain a little bit about this stamp set. So this is kind of an incentive, or I don't want to say incentive, but it is a little extra perk for signing up for the Collective Creators for a 1-year subscription in the month of September. So this is our launch month. This is the first month our community is starting to grow. And if you do sign up for a year, not only will you save a bunch of money, but you'll also get this stamp set. If you decide not to sign up for a year and you want to do monthly or 3 months or 6 months, you'll still get a free gift. You're going to get an enamel pin, which you can check out over on Instagram or on Facebook. If you don't already follow us, go ahead and check that out. We have a picture of the pin as well as a picture of the stamp set. I'll also link the Collective Creators below in case you want to check out the website, see if it's right for you. I'm sure by now you guys have probably heard about the Collective Creators, but this way you can kind of see what it all is all about. So I'm just finishing up my little globe here, and for the rest of the mug, I guess, I'm going to switch over to some B90 markers, which is like a navy blue. I like to use this color combination for night skies or denim, jeans, or whatever, but we do have a lot of the navy in our logo, so I wanted to add that, and that way our globe would really pop. So I'm going to go right in with my darkest color. I'm familiar with this color combination, and I'm well aware of how well these colors blend together. So I'm going to go right in with that B99, and I'm adding some shading on either side of the mug. Again, this is a round object, so you want to keep your highlight in the center to kind of keep the shape of the mug. I'm asking. Wow, I can't speak today. I'm adding a little bit of shading to the back portion of the mug as well, and then moving on to the B97, totally forgetting about the handle of the mug. So I have to go back in with my B99, and I'm just going to add a little shading kind of on the inside of the handle with that B99, and then just extend that out a little bit with that B97. The outer portion of the handle, or I guess what would be closest to you if you're picking it up, it would be the lightest because that would be where the light would be hitting. Next, going to move on to the B95, and I'm pretty much doing the same thing here. And here is where I'm going to start meeting where that globe is. So I'm just going to kind of outline that particular area and then just blend out that B97 to meet that area. I started off with a flicking motion, but I figured this was going to be a little bit more difficult trying to work around this mug, especially being I was going for a no line look with the globe, which didn't end up working out anyway. But at this point, I don't know that. So I'm just kind of scribbling on the color. You don't necessarily have to use the flicking motion. I know that the flicks, you see a lot of colorists use that because it makes your coloring a little bit easier. It makes the blending a little bit easier and kind of adds some textures to some of your objects. But it is by no means a necessity to Copic color. So here you can see I'm not doing the flicking anymore. I'm going to finish off with that B91 just for that highlight area inside the mug or inside the middle of the mug to keep that round appearance. And we're going to do the same thing for this other mug, only I'm going to be using some cool gray markers. So I want this to kind of appear as a white mug or maybe a light gray mug. But again, the cool grays blend beautifully together. So I'm going directly in with my darkest color here. I'm adding my shading in the same places I did for the first mug. And you can see that I'm starting off with the C7. A C7 is a very, very dark gray. It's nearly black. However, every white object will still have shadows to it, will still have shading. So although I plan on leaving some white space in this mug, I want there to still be dimension. So I started off with that really scary dark gray. Next, going in with the C5 and just extending those areas out. You can also see that I did create some shadows where that blue mug is in front of this white mug. So underneath the handle there, on both the inside of the handle and the outside of the handle, would cast a shadow on this mug, as well as off to that left hand side. Extending those shadows out each and every time underneath that mug next to it, as well as on either side of this white mug. And I am here using a flicking motion just to kind of get my blending to blend better, I guess. And like I said, I do want this mug to appear white. And once everything is colored, it will appear as if it is more of a white mug. Now you can go in with a colorless blender to get rid of these flick lines in the center, but I recently purchased this C00, which is pretty much a colorless blender with a teeny tiny bit of pigment. So I'm just going to quickly go over those areas to have more of a seamless blend and get rid of those flick lines from that C1. I wanted to add a little bit of coffee inside of this white mug here, so I'm going to bring out some E50 markers. Using that E59 as my darkest color, just adding a little bit of shading on either side, blending that out with the 57, 55, and just leaving that center for the 53 for the highlight color. I'm also going to bring out those cool gray markers again, just to add a little bit of shading to the inside of this other mug here. There's not much of it showing, being we have so much craft supplies inside, but I didn't want to leave this completely white. So here is where I'm taking a look at this, and I hate my globe. And I think it's because that has no line coloring and the rest of it does not. So luckily I left my stamp inside my Mini Misty, and I was able to restamp that with the blackout ink instead of the fade out ink. And I liked that much better. So we're going to move on to the crafting supplies here. Starting off with the ruler, I am adding my shading off to the left-hand side because this is kind of tilted a little bit. My darkest color is actually the E15, but it blends nicely with the Y20 markers, and I want this to be like a wooden ruler. So I'm just leaving that highlight for that Y21 off to the right-hand side. Going to move on to some RV markers for this one pencil here, and decided this blended in way too much with the background. So I'm going to skip purples and pinks for the remainder of my craft supplies here because that definitely blended in a little bit too much. Going to switch over to some BG markers for this marker here. Realize that the marker itself probably should have been white and the top should have been the BG marker. So I'm just coloring the top portion a little bit darker than the rest of the marker itself. Keeping a center highlight. Again, this is a round object, so you will have a center highlight for pretty much everything except for the ruler and the scissors inside this mug. So you'll just add a little bit of shading to the outside of each of the objects. For this green colored pencil here, again, adding that shading on either side and also adding a little bit of a shadow where the ruler is hanging over this pencil. And for this green combination, I just wasn't getting the contrast I was looking for. For any other object, it probably would have been fine, but it didn't appear to be round. So I'm going to bring in the G28, which is a super dark green, and I'm just going to add a little bit of that and blend that out with my darkest midtone and then quickly with my lightest color, so I don't blend it too much. The paper is pretty saturated at this point, so I don't want to over blend and lose that contrast. For the handles of the scissors, I'm going right in with my darkest color because I'm using a red combination and I don't want any bleeding because I won't be able to take it up at this point. So I'm going to go right in with my darkest color to avoid oversaturating the paper and having these colors bleed. Reds tend to bleed a little bit more than any other color combination anyway, and I just don't want to take the chance at this point. For the paintbrush, I'm going to move on to some E30 markers to make this look more like a wooden paintbrush. Again, just concentrating that highlight being in the very center and just adding a little bit of shading on the base of the bristles themselves. For the little metal piece that's on the paintbrush and that one pencil there, going to bring back out my C markers and again, just adding a little bit of shading on either side, keeping that center highlight, and this will look as if it's kind of metal. So I'm not going as light as I did with the mug. My lightest here is the C3. For the wooden part of the one pencil there, I'm going to use the same color combination as I did for the ruler so that it looks kind of like wood, I guess. So now that all my coloring is done, I'm going to go ahead and add some shadows to the mugs themselves. I'm going to bring out some warm grays here because I don't want it to blend in too much with all the other areas that I use the cool grays. So for my shadows, I like to start with the darkest color first. I'm going in with that W7 and adding a shadow underneath each one of these mugs, blending that out a little bit with the W5 and also adding a little bit of shading to the back portion of the table, I guess that you could say that these are on, just adding a little bit. When you're looking at one object, the further back that object gets, the darker it will be. So next, moving on to the W3, extending those shadows out and again, extending that area out from the back portion of the desk or table. And then finally finishing off with the W1, pretty much coloring in the remainder of this little table. So now that my coloring is done, we're going to go ahead and stamp our sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And this sentiment is from the Better Together stamp set as well. Going to add a few white gel pen details to some of my objects here, and this always kind of boosts up your coloring. So if you're not happy with your coloring or you feel like maybe you don't have enough contrast, just add a few details with your white gel pen and it will work wonders, trust me. So I added a lot of white gel pen details to most of the objects here, and then added a little bit of sparkle to the globe itself with the Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen. I recently got the Nuvo Glaze, I think it's called. I don't know what it's called, but I'll link it below. And I recently got this. I usually use glossy accents, but wanted to give this a try just for the globe itself. And it works very similar to the glossy accents. I find that it's a little bit thinner. It's not quite as thick as the glossy accents, but gives very similar results. So that is it. That is the card for today. I will leave all of the supplies listed below, as well as a link to the Collective Creators in case you guys want to check that out. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.